want to express my deepest appreciation to everybody who's joining this webinar, this live webinar this weekend, because at this time, there's a lot more intense energy in the air. And one of the things that we do in this webinar is we integrate and stabilize a certain amount of silence. And at this time, because of this sort of liveliness which is present, stabilizing the silence is more of a thing to do. It's more of a thing. And so I really appreciate everybody's addition to the collective, to our collective. And as you know, I always report what's going on. So what I'm feeling is a really clear channel is forming from the denser levels of our being down to the subtler levels of our being. It's like creating an open flow, like an open doorway or an open field, which allows knowledge to express itself in a very effortless way. So thank you everyone for that. And I'll go ahead and do my prayer now that it's 8 o'clock, and then we'll dive in and see what else is going to happen. So thank you, Ma. Thank you to the source of creation, the birther of the multiverse, for being this live webinar, to all the infinite forms and expressions of that, to the divinity and everyone watching this webinar. Thank you for your contributions and the efforts on behalf of each person to support the highest and best possible outcome for tonight's session. Thank you dearly to everyone's ancestors for their contribution, for their presence, for their loving support. Thank you to the eternal tradition of knowledge. All right. So, as usual, we have a mix of some new people and some returning people. And I'd like to, because of that, close my little box here and close this other box. Okay, now I'm good. Because of that, I'd like to do the little mini intro to energy healing briefly. So, and anyway, this is a healing webinar specifically about health. So the principle of energy healing is that we direct our attention intelligently in order to activate or enliven wholeness at specific areas of the being or the physiology. And energy healing recognizes the range of the physiology from the very source of creation, which is infinite, unbounded, and unmanifest, all the way through to the dense physical level of the body. This part. So that's a smooth continuum from very, very refined to very concrete. And within the range of that continuum, we can bring our awareness into specific points. For that reason, I offer a lexicon or a language to describe the different at least eight distinct levels. And I honor those in the audience who divide to other numbers of levels, because it's a continuum, so it can be divided to any number of levels. But for me at the moment, 8 is working, and may it work for all of us this evening as equally well. So these layers from very, very subtle to very dense are one of the areas where awareness can travel to produce that effect of establishing wholeness. But within the context of these layers of self, there are lots of different, we have space and time also as dimensions that factor into the evolutionary process of healing through energy work. As I mentioned before we started, I've been experiencing a preparation for tonight's meeting for several hours. So I want everybody to know that one of the focuses tonight is going to be to address each person's specific concerns. And as I mentioned before, everybody will be treated anonymously, but as we're going on here, each person's concerns have been sort of arriving in my awareness over the last few hours, so that there's kind of a sense of what is needed. Now, the other thing that happened was the arrival of a sense of what is needed at the level of the collective. And I don't know about each individual city, but I can tell you that in Fairfield, and certainly from reports that I've gotten from various places in Europe and other locations, this last week was a bit of a doozy. So our community experienced a lot of transitions. The weight of the transitions or the changes can be traced, in part at least, back to the move of Saturn. Saturn is a very big, heavy planet, and it's on the move. It's in transition at this time. And the transition orients towards a breaking down or a deconstruction of old patterns for the sake of a rebirth. But as I've been looking at that structure of how the old patterns break down and how the rebirth comes forth, one of the interesting principles is that the vision of the rebirth is, although contained in the seed of the whole move, doesn't tend to reveal itself fully, and especially during the deconstruction part of the process. And I think my experience is one of the reasons for that is because the reconstruction part of the process is actually being structured while it happens. So during the deconstruction part of phase of the process, all one knows is that everything that one knew is falling apart. And the knowledge of what is to come hasn't birthed yet. So this is the period where a quality that we call faith is required. Now, faith, along with truth and love and compassion and all these other qualities, have a kind of a living, breathing presence in our own being. Also, a lot of the words have a long history of various connotations, including religious connotations, for centuries. Particularly faith is one of those. So I think the first thing that we have to do is we're going to dive in and look at the deconstruction process a little bit and start before the deconstruction begins, at the unmanifest point of the process where the bit that's deconstructing was expanding. So we have some value or structure, if in the case of the physiology it's an illness, which is sort of on the move and it's growing and it's expanding or it's becoming worse. And there's a point where it has to shift away from becoming worse to becoming better, where that illness or that imbalance has to shift. And right at that point of shift, there's another animate value of consciousness. And as I'm saying this, I'm talking about the collective level of the physiology. Just throwing that out there. We have 8 levels So collective level is the level where you are the laws of nature, and various structures or functions are experienced as subtle expressions of self. So that the turn of, oh, I was going on my path, and then I kind of got off my path, and now I have to turn and get right back on my path again. That moment of impact where you turn and go back on the path, that has its own sort of life of value. In Vedic terms, it's called Narayana. But in English terms, we can just call it the turn, because it's where it starts to turn. And in Vedic terms, it refers to that point as the creation was like pressing in on itself, and it was unmanifest, where it suddenly decided, hey, I think I'm going to expand into the Big Bang instead. So it was like going in, and then all of a sudden it goes, no, maybe I'll go the other direction. So that's where that quality is, right there. And then it gets. So what I'm experiencing right now is I'm just reading into everyone's physiologies, and I'm going back through that sort of archive that presented itself earlier in the evening, of the areas where the healing is required. And what we're doing is just lovingly appealing to the quality of the turn to reside in the point where the seed of the illness sits in the body, where the seed sits. And the seed also, as I was examining earlier, right at this time, it feels like the sort of pain that's associated with a birthing process a little bit. There's certain kinds of, they're all different kinds of pains, right? Our pain can come in different forms, but that feels like the pain that we're in right now. And I know that some people are going through a bigger deconstructions than others, but that pain has various discordant feelings connected to and associated with it, such as grief, and that sort of deep aching pain. And so those qualities are being addressed with the turn. And behind all the manifested forms which are in the collective level, the physiology, behind every one is totality. Because at that level of being, even though you are the laws of nature and there are different specific divine forms, you could call divine forms, which are manifestations of self, at that level, self isn't experienced as separate or isolated in any way. All the forms are like a big family, and they're all really intimately woven into each other like a fabric. So that's a tie-in to infinity. And as the turn is honored and presents to the parts of the physiology that require healing, so also that quality of the turn reflects back into the field of being, into the field of infinity, and is nourished and healed itself, and it receives like all the now here's where I'm reading into, I'm looking for words because I can see it really clearly, but I need to describe it to you, because that's what, by the way, that's what I'm doing. If we're still in the little bits and pieces of the introduction, is I'm just basically reading and reporting what the group is doing. So I'm not doing it, I'm just reporting it. And it's your like amazingness, your divine brilliance, your cosmic connection, which is responsible for the healing that takes place. Thank you. The quality of the turn. The quality of the turn required more grace, more smoothness, more smoothness. Evidently, the rebirth that takes place after the collapse, then there's a rebirth, and the beauty and the fullness and the power of the rebirth is still contained like a seed at the very, very first moment that which was becoming worse decides to get better. So it's a very abstract thing that's happening, but as the quality of the turn moved back into the field of pure being, in that field, it was as if blessed, I guess is a good way to describe it, blessed by wholeness, that it should. A lot of things are happening at once. There are blueprints that are stored or archived at various places in creation, and the blueprints are somehow part of the blessing that the turn is receiving. It's abstract, but that's okay, because what that means is that the move is deep, deep, deep down inside, and that is going to help us address this discord that we're feeling as a result of Saturn. Saturn is really deep and abstract, and Saturn covers things up. Question. Dearest Divine Dorothy, having some problems with sciatica. Vision is getting quite cloudy. Could be cataracts. But I feel I should be able to heal both of these. Of course you can. I, however, have not been as yet successful. Hoping to gain some greater ability. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for offering a specific, because we can use that as the point of reference in the relative, because so far what's happening is very, very abstract. So it's good to have a point of reference. And I just went in and was asking the being which point of reference felt most comfortable, and the sciatica felt like the comfortable point of reference, or the one that was most appropriate to use in this case. So looking at that, okay. So this is good for everybody in the group, because in fact I was thinking, oh, I should do this for everybody when we start the healing tonight. So thank you for your question, because this ties in nicely. So the thing is that in our culture, in our world, a great deal of honor is generally given to the energies of the head. Besides that, this is where the senses of perception are. It's also something that's considered highly acceptable. If I want to talk to you about my thoughts or my ideas, I can probably do that in any setting whatsoever. I could walk into a college classroom or even a kindergarten classroom, and I could, talk about my thoughts and ideas. And over the last few decades, more compassion and understanding has been, more acceptance has been given to talking about feelings, which I can tell you a century ago, in a lot of places, in a lot of families, in a lot of locations, talking about feelings was taboo. But now it's not so much. And our society is much more kind of open and accepting about talking about feelings, which is more the heart area. So the head area of the body and the heart area of the body are both basically understood and honored and appreciated and considered acceptable. But the lower abdominal area of the physiology is still in the taboo department. So I can't walk into a classroom and talk about excretion or sex or any of the other topics that we tend to generally associate with the energies of the pelvis. But the foundation for the heart energy and the head energy is in the pelvis. It is the stable strength of that part of the body, and it is the purifying functions, and it is even the procreative functions of that part of the body, which are responsible for the rest of the whole field, energy field of the physiology. That's why it's first. So we count the chakras from the root, right? We don't count them from up here, up at top of the head. So the sciatica is based on the inflammation, is based on frustration that is sitting up against the spine in the nerves, down at the base of the spine there. And that frustration comes from a lack of recognition, a lack of self-acceptance, a lack of self-love, a lack of appropriate usage of that part of the physiology. And I'm not saying that you're not doing good with your body, but centuries of ancestors have had a lot of really deep discordant feelings connected to and associated with the functions of the whole lower abdominal pelvic region. That's just the way it is. It's associated with dirty and taboo and sinful. And there are a lot of discordant feelings connected in there, such as embarrassment and shame and remorse and regret and trauma. There can be trauma in that part of the physiology. And it's, even if in this time, at this time, in this body that you're now possessing, those there, you don't have specific life experiences that might have been aggravated or aggravated those particular feelings. The fact that they're lodged at a molecular level of the physiology means that they can still cause trouble. And again, this is where we come into this point from the very beginning of today's session: intelligent focus of attention. If you go to the doctor, they test the flesh. They take pictures of it and they take samples of it. And they're not to say that that's bad, because it's great that Western medicine knows how to test the body so very well. But it's not likely that if you go to a Western doctor, they're going to say, well, we really need to look at your great-great-great-grandmother's emotional body, because it looks like she might have been sexually abused. And due to that, there's some kind of trauma and frustration stuck in the tissues. So for that reason, we're approaching it with energy work, right? So I'm just asking, I close my eyes because I'm asking, how many layers of ancestors? For how many people who are participating? We have a very nice, big, thick group tonight. A lot of people here. So what we're finding is that in order to heal our own bodies, we're required to do work that supports the healing of the collective. And it makes sense, because over the course of centuries, the collective has suffered and struggled in various ways. And without having the use of energy healing, without having the blessings of now on our earth, this awareness of the source of creation, which has, thanks to the many great teachers and gurus and many great people, that awareness has opened up. And traditions, I should include traditions like American Indian tradition, different traditions, have held, in the face of a sort of thrust toward the relative field of creation, they've held sacred that inner silence and the reality of that, and continue to honor that that's a vital experience, and it's valid. So based on that, with all gratitude to the holders or the keepers of eternal wisdom, we offer that experience and understanding to the ancestors in layers, including performances of homage to the ancestors, which can be done. You can hire people. You can hire, holy men to do offerings to your ancestors. But in energy healing, we can do them ourselves. The being there are locations, just as the body, divides into 8 layers, so the field of creation divides into multiple layers, and there are locations where the laws of nature perpetually support the ancestors more effectively than others. So that area is awakening because awareness is going in there. We feel into the archive of the ancestors. And we feel into those sacred spaces where the ancestors are honored and they feel safe. They're taken care of. And in that space, the offering at the new moon is traditionally at the new moon. And there's certain new moons that are better for certain ancestors than others. And there's traditionally a time of year in the September when it's especially good. And so because of energy healing not being bound by space and time, because we're working with the consciousness at the very deep level, I'm just feeling how the awareness is going in. And what I'm feeling is it's almost like a ray or a beam from the heart is moving into that sacred space, into that sacred temple for the ancestors. And as such, it draws forth a quality of self from the collective level of being, where that particular intelligence, which specifically knows exactly how to address the ancestors in the most dignified and the most effective way to support their highest healing. This brings up a point. This is for the ancestors. This is clearing illusion or Maya for them. And that is that sometimes we choose to forge relationships with dysfunctional people. Sometimes we have them as family members. Sometimes we have them as friends and associates or people we work with. And we do that specifically to allow our own divinity to shine forth. Because if you're in a situation where everybody around you is completely functional and completely holding up their end of the responsibilities and so forth, then this kind of situation doesn't require any effort on your part to move forward. Everybody's helping each other. And that's what we're doing in this group. We've created, there's already a sacred space present in our group where we're all supporting each other. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have discord in order to evolve, right? Because if everybody's supporting everybody and everybody's functional, then we can start to move forward as a collective, as a unit. And the progress is enhanced by each perspective. Each individual person adds a perspective. And so you get a multifaceted diamond. And because it's such a big group, we have a very multifaceted diamond. But the role of dysfunctional people is to awaken the ability to self-love. Because if you have to deal with someone where you have to be patient, you have to be tolerant, you have to be forgiving, then you see just how good you are. And people self-select. Those relationships are like karmic contracts that we make with people in order to awaken individual capacity to self-love. Once the individual says, oh, wow, I was so patient with that person. I was so good to them. They took and took and took from me, and I gave and gave and gave. Once you realize that you were the giver and that you were so sweet, then you appreciate that quality in yourself. And once that quality is really honored and appreciated at a deep level, and wherever there was a little piece of, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or, somehow it was conceived in sin, and therefore I'm naturally like not a very nice person, all that washes away because of that person did such a big favor, right? They were the difficult point that created contrast to all your sweetness. Then you love yourself. But it's more than that. It then becomes not so much loving self like, oh, I'm so vain, but it's that one recognizes the divinity that is within being. And so it's really loving divine being. And that is what this energy healing process is really all about, is finding all those little hard knots. And it's like a hard knot down at the base of the spine there, where those discordant feelings are getting unraveled. Even as I'm speaking, as we're speaking it and we're talking to the ancestors, and the ancestors are starting to let go of a lot of those discordant feelings, and they're starting to accept and recognize their status, their value as an antenna of the whole universe, and as a point of contact between divine being and its own nature. As that happens, that's the wake up. It's happening at a very deep level. It's happening at the ancestral level. It's happening at the molecular level of physiology. So what that means is those cells that are down there, those nerve cells that are down there, and the tissues around them that are all inflamed because they're holding on to the discordant feelings and the illusion, as all that energetically starts to clear out of the tissues, it gets into that cord of light and it swirls back and it is released. It dissolves back to Mother Earth. And when that releasing, dissolving, swirling energy is felt, we just offer it back to being, because the field of infinite being multiplies it to infinity. That helps it touch all the ancestors, and it refines and it enhances that process, that healing process. And that's that feeling I was saying earlier. It feels a little bit like giving birth or something at this time. This is sort of very intense, sort of thick transformation that wants to take place in the collective. So the most important thing, I'm looking back at what just happened and that healing for the sciatica, and it feels like it completed, but I look back and the most important point for me was that moment when that energy like just blossomed out of the chest, and it was the intelligence, or it was the quality of being that was responsible for the whole healing that took place. The whole healing was under the umbrella of that particular form of your own divine self. And that going through that healing process was designed to reveal that particular quality of self to itself, to you, through you, to its own, to the nature of the wholeness of creation, so that a peace is established. The embodiment of divinity is established another step. And that's what I was going to say, was that the whole purpose for energy healing is to ultimately embody divinity, that the potential of the human physiology. I was, anybody out there familiar with Jordan Peterson? He's a sort of, he's like the voice of the younger generation right now. He's a speaker. He's a psychiatrist or psychologist at a university in Canada. And he was saying, it's so amazing. I was listening to him because my kids, you got to listen to him, Mom. He's so good. He's saying, how is it that human beings have been on Earth for 100,000 years plus, about 160,000 years? And at this point, we still are living in physiologies that only last about 80 years. You know, if you're lucky, you know, you grow to adulthood, you get married and have a family and have a nice job, and then you die after 80 years. That's about, you know, that's about the best that most people can hope for. I mean, we're smart. Humans are smart. We can like make the internet. We can fly to the moon. We can do cool stuff. But how much the physiology has actually evolved over 160 million years, or no, excuse me, 1,000 years, 160,000 years. That's, I don't know. It seems as if that the potential is so huge. It's so huge that I feel as if part of what we're doing here is we want to push past the individual like level measures of achievement, the individual measures of achievement. If we achieve something that's way more than the individual measure of achievement, then of course the individual measure also is taken care of. Like senses of perception, for example, in this last question, this person is saying that they also are getting foggy vision. The potential for the senses of perception is so far past 20/20 vision. It's possible to have ultra super vision and ultra super hearing. So if we aim past simply having okay vision to enhancing the capacity or divine embodiment in the eyes, divine embodiment. Okay, so what's happening? We're looking at the eyes now, and oh, this comes into a very yummy thing that has been coming up for me over the last couple of weeks that I wanted to share with you guys. And that is that I've been noticing, okay, I'll just go backwards a little bit just so you can get the backstory on this. When I was a very small child, my parents took me to Australia. And in Australia, I was lucky, even though I was very teeny. I was like 6 months when they got on the ship to go there. That was about 2.5 or something, or 2 when they left Australia. So I was little. But they lived in the outback with the Aborigines. And the Aborigines have a sort of spiritual system of understanding called, that utilizes the nature of something called dream time. And it just so happened that the shaman of the little Aboriginal troop where we lived, who was named Old Johnny, I think. My mom can correct me if that is incorrect, but I think his name was Old Johnny. And she said he was a sight, you know, he was missing an eye and he had a bone through his nose. And he was holding me on his lap, and he would hold me for long periods of time, and he would sing to me in these traditional songs of his people. And I realize now that he was passing on his knowledge. He was passing it to the West. And I realize now, I'm sure Old Johnny is probably not in the body, at least not in that body. But I realize that in the sleep and dream cycles, we rejuvenate our bodies in a very profound way that we do not rejuvenate them in the waking cycle. And as I started to have more and more of the experience of the sort of integration of the dream time with waking state consciousness, like I've been having the sleep and dream time awareness for decades, but this integration in the waking consciousness, I realized that if we integrate deep sleep coherence, that means the way the nervous system functions, then what we're ultimately doing is we are deeply rejuvenating our physical bodies while we're in waking consciousness. Because that's what happens in deep sleep, right? Is the brain goes into kind of delta mode functioning where this 1 to 3 cycles per second energy frequency. And in that mode, the physiology moves into a space where it's taking adenosine diphosphate and reconstructing it as adenosine triphosphate, which are like little energy batteries or little energy cells inside the physiology at a subcellular level. So the principle here is that all the different frequencies, all the different range of expression of consciousness from abstract, unmanifest being, which is no cycles per second, through the very, very fundamental, very slow cycles per second. And this is where we experience ourselves as these more abstract form of creation, to the denser, to the faster, to the more intense levels up at the top, and to the physical material waking state. It's like building a chord with several tones or pitches. Music is a language. We knew that. But the language, the effects of the different resonations, how we interweave with each other. This information's coming in as a download for everyone, coming into the God presence. The rebuilding of eyesight is based upon the rejuvenation of the cells in this part. Part of it's muscular, and part of it is actually cellular. It's at a cellular, the nerve cells, the optic nerve, and all the little rod and cone cells and all that. So part of it is in the mechanism of the eye, and part of it is in the muscles around the eye for being able to focus clearly. In both cases, this is an upgrade for the quantity of energy that's in the cells in that part of the body, and that includes an increase of oxygen, which I was not expecting. I wasn't expecting any of this, but but I didn't know, and I'm not a doctor, but I didn't know that bringing more oxygen into oxygenating the cells supports their ability to heal faster. Ooh, that's cool. That's something that I could probably Google. I'm just asking my team, will you make a note? We should Google that just to see if there's any kind of objective science behind that idea, because anyway, it's coming right now as an intuition, as a feeling of knowingness. Mm-hmm. So there's an intelligence in the various structures of the physiology. The eyes, for example, the eyes and the eyesight. The nature of sight has its own unique intelligence. And that intelligence resides in those organs, but it also resides to some varying degree in all the other parts of the physiology, because we really perceive with our whole physiology. Even the cells have their own little kind of way that they understand their environment. It's not exactly the same exactly as the sight of the eyes, but it's like that. It's more like a synesthetic type of mix of sensational understanding. That means that intelligence resides systemically through the physiology, and as such, it also resides systemically through the entire cosmos. So awareness is settling into that level of intelligence of the being, which is the underlying intelligence of sight. And what I see happening, what I see happening is that there's a quality in that intelligence, which again is like wasn't fully honored. So I'm experiencing, first thing is a recognition. So you could think of this as seeing itself, because that's how it's a sort of self-referral fold into its own nature. And as it does that, it enhances its own capacity to clearly recognize the power of sight. And as that happens, it means that The divinity, the divine being of all creation is becoming integrated into that part of the physiology, that particular intelligence, and it's different. I'm looking into the group, and everybody, it's a little bit different. But that particular intelligence in each physiology has been recognized more or less with each individual. And so we're bringing it back to infinite percent. I was going to say 100%, but when we're dealing with the field of pure being, it's infinite percent. And this folding of sight on itself, that means the intelligence of sight, the underlying intelligence, or you could call the angel that oversees the sight, or deva of the visual apparatus, as it's folding to itself and it's clarifying its own capabilities. We as individuals offer meaning into the process. It's basically meaningless unless we love it. Unless it's important to us that the deva of sight is healed. I talked about this a little bit last time, but the collective level of the physiology, where we can identify devic structures or angels or gods or all the different forms, all the different intelligences that make up the sort of the fundamental functions that give rise to the whole universe. There's a bigness to that level of creation. There's a vastness. There's the fact that they spread systemically through the whole creation. We do, you and I do. This is part of our own being, that level of our physiology spreads systemically through the whole creation. And as such, there's a tendency to not be particularly attached to anything. It doesn't attach, and that part of the physiology doesn't really mind if there's an earthquake that kills a lot of people or whatever, because that was nature, some Davic earth structure coming up and making the shift that Earth needed to make at that point. And if 60,000 people died, well, that's what had to happen, so that's that level. So that means the meaning, though, all the families who cry over their lost loved ones, or maybe I should use a happier example, I don't know, but it gets the point across that the meaning comes from us as individuals. So that means that there is an interface between the superficial level of the conscious mind, individuality, even call it ego, whatever you want to call that individual element. It rises to its cosmic status by being understood as a functional player in the process of creation, or the process of healing in this case. Because we care. Because we care. Because in our hearts, we can embrace the intelligence of the eyesight like a beloved child who requires healing. And we can support that function. We can recognize that it's happening and adore the process and rejoice that it's happening. That adds that little extra link between the actual functions that take place at a subtle level of creation and the connection to the actual physiology. Every cell has its own little bubble of intelligence around it. It's got its own little astral body and its own little causal body and so forth. Each one precious. And right now, we're speaking to the cells. Ooh, there's another question. We're speaking to the cells, and the cells can also do this. The cells also live at a level of creation where life is meaningful. They live lives. Our cells live lives, and their lives are meaningful to them. Okay, don't laugh. Sorry, shouldn't laugh. To us, the life of a cell seems not very meaningful, doesn't it? But to them, it's meaningful. So don't laugh. Anyway, um, and they also, the fact that the cell can feel like emotions, like a discordant feeling can get stuck in a cell. Fat cells are a really good example of that. Every fat cell has a little, I think this is a quote, someone said it one time, every fat cell contains a little uncried tear, some little discord. Oh, that made me feel crummy. I didn't like it. I'll eat a cookie. That'll make me feel better. So there's, the cells also have feelings. So we can extend the work that we're doing in supporting the ability to lovingly enhance the healing process by honoring our own ability to give that process meaning, by caring. To the cells, we recognize it in the cells and their ability to care, their ability to have meaning in their lives. And then what happens is we end up having multiple points. Then we have the field of absolute unbounded being. We have our holding of the importance of the work that we're doing, and we have the cells holding the importance of the work they're doing. Then we have 3 points in a relationship with each other. And when that happens, the whole fractal structure of the universe unfolds from that. And the work that we're doing is able to be recognized out into the whole entire field of creation. I have a lot of charts I need to make. Since our last webinar, I did a workshop in Las Vegas, which was a joy. And one of them, I ended up having a pad of paper, a big pad of paper, and ended up doing a bunch of charts. And I realized that it's very helpful actually to have pictures sometimes. So anyway, as soon as I get a moment, I will make some charts for you guys. We'll put them up on the website. Okay, another question came in. Hi, there seems to be a lot of women who have breast lumps, as I do, or breast cancer in our culture at this time. Does this relate to experiences of our ancestors too, or some kind of frustration? Thanks. Gosh, I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Because I had a breast lump, but I don't anymore. Yay, knock on wood. So, so it's really a huge pleasure for me to be able to share this with you, because it's an area of really important concern. So the breasts, of course, are the nourishers of the physiology, and they're in this, as I mentioned before, there are these 3 kind of central energy centers in the body. There's the head energy that has to do with intelligence and awareness and all the thought processes and so forth, perception. And then there's the heart area, which is all about feeling, desire. And then there's the whole pelvic area, which is the power and stability and foundation for the other 2. But in the chest area, we've got lots of really interesting energies going on. And, for the men in the audience too, because I know I've got a lot of men on tonight's healing session, men and ladies both. One of the qualities of this area is both there's a heater. Okay. Anyway, is both sense of responsibility. We carry in this area a sense of responsibility. The first function of the physiology, the first thing you ever do is breathe. It's a responsibility. You have to. Even if you're only this big, you have to breathe. Because if you don't breathe, you don't make it to this point. So this whole apparatus in here, up in the chest area, it has a kind of it has a quality of supporting life, supporting and sustaining life. And the breasts are absolutely the nourishers, right? So in the case of lumps, what I found is the first energy that's underlying the lumps is the feel of not, is the action not self-nourishing. Too busy taking care of everybody else, not busy enough taking care of yourself. So that's number one. And that's why, again, when I say taking care of yourself, the ancestors, thank you for bringing up the ancestral point here. The ancestors felt, a lot of them, that it was actually sinful. They felt that it was not appropriate to be very taking care of themselves, that it was only appropriate to take care of others, and that it was self-serving and vain and greedy or something if you took care of yourself. So that illusion has to clear from the ancestors' thinking, from their heart chakra areas, chest, the tissues of the chest, the lymphatic system. You have to take care of yourself. And when you do, this is the way that divine being is self-interacting to understand its own nature, which is why the universe exists. Being, remember, it was folding in on itself, and then it decided, oh, I'm not going to fold in anymore, I'm going to come out. And at that moment, that's when the intention started to arise that it really wants to know itself. It wants to express itself and then know itself through its expression, and then adore itself. So the taking care of self isn't a selfish act. It is just divine expression finding its way to the surface. That's the first thing, is taking care of yourself. On that note, ladies, avoid wearing a bra whenever possible. Bras have a really they constrain and constrict the energies in the chest area. And in order to let go of the knotted up, they're like little knots of frustration and discordant feeling, that pain, then that flow has to be open. So as much as possible, unrestricted flow. Cancer is in the same family as some other discordant energy structures, which depression is another one, and suicide is another one. But they function in such a way that they kind of feed off of negative energy. So if you go into that field, anybody who's has ever had to deal with depression, that's another one where you think, oh, I know I feel depressed and I know I should be able to handle this myself. I'm going to go in there with all my cannons blasting and I'm just going to blast this thing out of me. Well, what happens is the depression is gripping like that, and the cancer does the same. It grips and you go in there, I'm going to fight it out. I'm going to fight it out. What happens is that energy causes it to grow and grow and grow. So the way to handle it is the seed of the discord is sitting here at the causal level of the physiology. That's where karma is. So the cancer resonation or energy frequency is at the causal level of physiology. If we look at it from the gross senses, from the denser level of physiology, we look in at the causal level, what we find is that the levels of the physiology expand. So the deeper levels look very big. And if you look at it from the surface, it looks so big and it looks so impossible to overcome. However, if we approach it from the bottom side up, if we go back to the field of being and we look at that cancer coming up from the celestial and collective levels of the physiology, the causal level, it may be an infinite expression of self, but it's not a bigger infinite than the infinity of the collective. So the collective physiology, from the level of the collective physiology, we look at that energy that's in the causal level of the body, and what we see is the antidote. The energy that's in, there's a kind of a dull aching pain in those lumps. So that dull aching pain is offered back into the field of pure being, and pure being looks at that and says, oh, look, this is an incompletion. This is something that is going to require a second element in order to balance it, in order to resolve it. So the resolution, the other side of the coin, or you could say if the aching pain of the lump is there, the energy that comes and meets it is the energy of deep, deep self-acceptance and deep, deep nourishing love. And what it requires of a woman is not to look outside herself and expect the love of someone else to complete the feeling of being beloved. If you say, well, I don't feel lovable, but if so-and-so would tell me that I'm lovable, or if my husband would just treat me like I'm lovable, or if my kids would just treat me like I'm lovable, or if I was driving down the street and that other driver would treat me like I'm lovable, then I could feel lovable, but I don't feel lovable unless no, then you have to let go of that completely, because the most precious love is the love that comes from the person who knows you best. Because if the driver in the other car loves me, to be honest, it doesn't matter, because who knows who that person is, right? And they don't know me. And because they don't know me, what are they loving? They're loving something they think is me. But you know you like nobody knows you. And your own self-love is 100,000 times more nourishing and healing and uplifting and transformative than anybody else's love. What's happening in the sacred sanctum of the self is the activation of the capacity to flow unrestricted, clearing very, very, very fine nadis that are down at their teeny, teeny little tippy ends, down into the field of the celestial and collective level of physiology. That sacred sanctum of the self is way down there at the gap. And those little teeny little points that clear that illusion that any love really comes from anybody but oneself ultimately. And from the ancestors, it's clearing for the ancestors, multiple generations. So as that healing takes place, the flow of love can move into the body. Now, this is the action step. You can, in the beginning, I found it was helpful to have frankincense oil, and I would put frankincense oil on the spot, and I would rub the oil in, and the secret is transcend while you're rubbing in the oil. And this goes for anybody who's got any, like some people have some little cancers on their skin, or anybody who's got any cancer anywhere that you can get that topical oil in there. The massage is done when the awareness is in a state of transcending. That means no expectations and just like simple. And what I found is that when my awareness is transcending and I was rubbing in the oil, the move becomes very, very slow. It's not like I'm massaging. It's not this kind of, it won't want to be that kind of massage. It becomes a kind of like, I'm barely even touching. And then after a while, you'll find that you get the right energy frequency going. You don't even need the oil. But in the beginning, using the oil and moving it while the awareness is in a state of infinite unboundedness. And what I found was that even if it doesn't touch exactly, if it's like this, if there's a gap, you see the gap? I'm using my necklace, it's a gap. Even that, just energy touching energy. And what I found was that the lump waxed and waned, and one has to clear a lot of the fear that's associated with it. And then I found that I could go in there and the lump was smaller, but then I would find that lump and I would put the oil in, and within seconds, it would completely just dissolve. It's possible to dissolve it within seconds once you get the hang of it. And the hang of it is you're transcending, and the feeling which is offered back to divine being is, first, it's the feeling of the ache of the lump, but then medicine comes back, the divine being brings in through the crown of the head the exact frequency of the energy required. And that exact frequency is a quality of love, which is the most nourishing love that you could ever feel. And the feeling goes not just to where the lump is, it goes to the whole body. Because believe me, if the lump gets bad and you have to go through surgeries and stuff, then the whole body suffers. So the whole body needs the love. Every cell of the body needs the love. And I found that if I was doing that at night before I fell asleep, that I could lay soaking in that self-love for hours and hours, all night long. I could just soak in it. And because, of course, because I also have my long list of people that I'm taking care of, I was passing it on to everybody else too. But that's the procedure, to the best of my understanding. That feeling of the most luscious love you could ever feel, that is the antidote to cancer. And that goes, I believe, for all types of cancer. And it doesn't matter how advanced it is or where it is in the body. There are plenty of medical records of people completely overcoming cancer that's all through their whole bodies. You can do it. It's a medicine, right? It's a light medicine. Okay, another question. Hi, dear Dorothy. I'm being advised to have both knees replaced due to them being bone on bone. I'm resistant for several reasons, but I'm wondering about the possibility of creating more cartilage. Yes. And if not, how would replacements affect energy flow? Blessings. I'm so glad. I'm so grateful that you asked this question. So, physiology in multiple layers. You build up from the source. What we do is we build the healing up from its foundation. The foundation is first the resonation in the celestial level of the physiology. It's a resonation of flexibility and capability. Capability and flexibility as the underlying, and with that, a really good, healthy dose of compassion and understanding and courage. So these resonations are working together as a kind of a foundational hum at the celestial level of physiology. At the next level up, there are structures, and this is where you are the laws of nature, remember? So there are these structures which are able to interface with the tissues of the body in such a way as to create great transformation, complete and powerful, concrete transformation. You can think of these particular structures of self as kind of cosmic doctors, if you will, great energy healing structures that can go into the body and can go into the cells. They can see like ultra microscopic, and they can find exactly what the imbalance is and where the imbalance is in the body. And in this case, I'm seeing some ancestral elements also. And I'm also seeing the restructuring of the knees is going, the fact that what caused the knees to break down in the first place was an imbalance at the sacrum. So like I use my hands because I'm following, it's like a thread, right? My awareness, our awareness, it goes into the knees, and anybody else in the group who's got any kind of joint problems or so, it goes into those joints, and then it follows the thread back to it's where the seed of the illness resides. And of course, in the case of the knees, it resides in the lumbar area of the back, which of course is bringing us back to that point that was made earlier about the energy of the pelvis and how important it is to be able to recognize one's essential nature of the divine being of all creation, to recognize its essential nature manifested in the hip, belly, buttocks, pelvis area. Everybody's beautiful. And it doesn't matter how the tissues are arranged or rearranged, or, it doesn't matter what Hollywood says. The fact that you're living in a human body means that the divine source of creation is experiencing itself through you, and that makes you beautiful. It just does. And if you believe, no, I'm not beautiful, it doesn't matter. Because your belief, no, I'm not beautiful, is basically illusion. The fact that you live means that divine being is experiencing itself through you, and this makes you beautiful. But sometimes those beliefs of, no, I'm not beautiful, and I don't like myself, and I don't like my belly fat, or I don't like whatever, these thought patterns are behind this situation. And there's a lot of stubbornness with it. So it's causing inflexibility. And deep root thought patterns, and they're mostly in the denser levels of the physiology, mental body, emotional body, like that. Physical, etheric, the dense levels of the physiology. So if I'm seeing all 4 dense levels of the physiology kind of light up, and that this deep root thought pattern is there, then of course I'm going to want to get underneath it. Or, I mean, I'm just showing you, this is what you want to do, is you want to get underneath it. You want to get to a deeper level so that you're bigger than that deep root thought pattern. You're bigger than that dragon. Jordan Peterson reference. Deep root thought patterns. It's a lot of self-protection going on behind those that the physical expression of the heaviness on the body or the weight on the body, and then the belief of, I'm not beautiful and I'm not beloved, or I'm not simply divine being knowing itself. That somehow I'm something more complicated than that. It's actually simple. And being able to, thank you. I can see your beautiful, amazing being is settling down and identifying with this simpler, more fundamental expression and understanding of self. And as that happens, it takes all the areas of life that are more complex and it makes them more simple. Because when you are more simple, then all the complexity tends to dissolve and fall away. The causal level, the physiology. So this is what's happening. When I say simple and I see that you're recognizing it, what I mean is that the awareness, which is up at the conscious level of the mind, is settling down and it's starting to self-identify with the expressions of being, which are more simple, physically simple. The collective level of the physiology, very physically simple. On the level of consciousness, very sophisticated. But that identification then supports the structures of the causal body. Several things. Number one, there's karma connected to and associated with this whole thing with the knees, and also the heaviness in the body and the weight and the inflexibility in the lower back and so forth. So that karma needs to be addressed. And then also, here we are at the causal body. The organ in the causal body responsible for the rebuilding of tissue. So first the karma, and I'm looking at how that wants to dissolve. It's ancestral karma. It's also karma based on a contract to self. All right. All right. As soon as I said contract to self, I'm looking out into the collective here of our group, and I'm seeing lots of people have lots of contracts. So it's time to work on dissolving them. I'm just going to move my foot. That's better. I've got a little table that's holding up my microphone, and it was like resting on my foot. Speaking of karma, it's like, wow, that was really uncomfortable. Anyway, better now. Let's see if I can do this so that my microphone doesn't fall off the table because my foot was holding it up. Okay, that works. Everybody can still hear me, right? Okay, good. We're good. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I got to get a pillow. I got it. This is happening. This is happening because this is what you need in your knee. You need some padding. So it just happens at this time that it's happening like this. And this nice little pillow is going to go under this little table. Oh, I bet that made a nice little noise for everybody, didn't it? Okay, let's try this. How's that working? That's why I didn't mind. It's okay. I think I got it. Okay, good. You know, we do this from many different angles at the same time. And by doing that, it's like we get to see what we're doing. This is how we get rid of karma, okay? We needed to demonstrate. I almost would grab my camera there and show you this crazy little setup I've got here, but the thing is this: you've got unbounded being as one point of reference in the field of infinity, and it's from the infinity that the phenomenal transformations are made. Then we have a point of reference from our own conscious mind and understanding what's going on. And then we can make another point of reference. And in this case, it's my table. I've got my table's actually a clarinet. In its case, it's holding up the microphone and the pillow. My friend here kind of like, when is it going to fall? The point is that eliminating karma is about healing the whole creation, basically. Because if the individual physiology is holding on to karma, then that karma is represented by every shard of the mirror. Every single piece of the mirror that reflects your reality back to you has a little bit of that karma in it. So it's like when the karma is sitting there, the contract is there. It expresses itself again and again and again and again from every single corner of creation as the creation reflects back onto individuality and back onto the conscious mind. So in order to eliminate the karma, one has to step out of the illusion that all these reflections from all the infinite shards of the mirror are the reality and reestablish recognition of self with infinite being. Once that's done, then it's possible to bring the other pieces to bear on the karma that complete it, that resolve the contract, that nullify the contract. So that's what we're doing right now, is we're going in, because a lot of people have contracts right now. I'm seeing it. So everybody's contracts are being handled from the level of the causal physiology with the blessings of the collective level of the physiology, which, as I mentioned before, has a sort of systemic reality and is already connecting you to every corner of creation. When you feel uncomfortable, that means the contract is ready to go. The contract only stays as long as there's some attachment. And a person can say, well, you know, I'm in this dysfunctional relationship with this person and it's really a big trouble, but I love them so much and I feel like I need to still be there for them and so forth. So at some point, that relationship becomes so uncomfortable. You're like, you know what? It's not worth it. I am so uncomfortable. I don't want to be in that relationship anymore. That's when you know it's time for the karma to go. So in this case, it's a self relationship. In this case, you have complete autonomy to say, you know what? I've been in my little cocoon and afraid of, you know, letting my beauty show and accepting myself as beautiful. I've been afraid to self-acknowledge that I am really divinity expressed. And, you know, I feel like that kind of protects me in certain ways. Once it's so uncomfortable that you're looking at double knee surgery, then it's time to say, you know what, it's okay. I don't have to hang on to that illusion anymore. So as the illusion softens, it's softening not just on an intellectual level, like Dorothy's telling me I should let it go, but we go down with our awareness, down into the causal level of physiology, down into the collective level of physiology, where the functions are that allow you to dissolve contracts. And we're just looking at the contracts and just feeling them, what they feel. They feel like little rigid areas, little stubborn areas in the physiology, in the field of the consciousness. And in those little stubborn areas, that little stubbornness is offered back to being. And from the level of being, the antidote is created. The completion. It's a partial value of creation. And it goes in there. And then the piece of being that brings fulfillment to that manifests forward. And I'm going very inward as I'm saying it, because I'm feeling something happening in the collective consciousness at the same time, because we've really been through a very, I mean, I'm not trying to say this to be sensational. I mean, I could tell you things about people that have happened in the last week that are unusually awful or amazing. But I professionally, I'm not going to do that, even though they're not even my clients. I'm not going to do that. But I can tell you that it's a very heavy, deep, thick under the surface movement that's taking place, that's causing those areas where the stubbornness are to kind of snap in some cases. So you have to get rid of the stubbornness and the contracts. And the contracts are like a kind of a stubbornness because they lock you in. So right there, and I'm feeling the energy starting to move. It's starting to, the flexibility quality is starting to roll through the areas where the contracts are and the stubbornness is. And as that happens, that flexibility is the medicine. And that flexibility is that energy frequency of the flexibility is the quality that we want to enhance. So to enhance it, we just offer it back to the field of pure being again, which of course multiplies everything to infinity. And so as that happens, then the energy medicine not only multiplies infinitely, but it also refines and it also enhances so that it's more specifically suited for everybody's individual situations. And right now I'm really feeling the dream time is awake, and it's coming back all the specific concerns of everybody in the group that I was feeling earlier before this webinar, so that the energy medicine goes in right exactly at the spot, in exactly the specific frequency, feeling, flavor that it needs to be to exactly address each person's concerns in the highest and best way. And it's interesting that as this is happening, our group as a whole is manifesting forth a quality from the collective level of being, which is a kind of you could call it like a kind of like a goddess form or something. It's like a form of being which we are collectively enhancing. It's forming as in the silent center of our collective. And there are certain beings like that only manifest as a byproduct of collective intention. We're each facets, right? Then we become like cells in that body. We're each pieces of it. And it's not just however big that being needs to be, we can draw in individuals in the collective out in our universe, the shards of the mirror, we can draw in as many people as we need to also enjoy this healing, so that that particular form of creation, which is yourself, has the opportunity to get as big and as powerful and exquisite as it needs to. Oh, wow. I not only just looked at the time, I just noticed that we're already over time. Oh, okay. So we need to end because we're over time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. However, we just got to a very exciting point in this webinar. So most of you, God bless, most of you are on the webinar subscription program, so you can join me tomorrow because we will pick right up here. But for those who aren't, you'll receive the recording. This quality of being, as I mentioned before, it's like our collective has brought forth an intelligence which has a tremendous capacity to heal in an extremely dynamic and concrete way. The physiology. My friend with the knee, by the way, be sure to use your hand chakras on the knee. My team, be sure to remind me to put the hand chakra healing video embedded in the letter that goes out to everybody for those who don't remember or didn't see it or want to review. But use your hand chakras when you're sitting watching TV. Get some pillows under your knees so that it's no strain. Pillows under the elbows, pillows under the knees, hands on knees like that. You don't have to touch physically. Can anybody see my knee? Just barely, right? Oh, I can put it up on my table. Oh, that should be interesting. One more thing on the table. Energy touching energy. Energy touching energy like that. And the medicine that your physiologies are creating can go right through the hands. And that flow is like the flow of intelligence in that being. And even though our collective was responsible for her manifestation, I see it as a female form. Once you're connected, once you're familiar with that part of self, then you can always go back and access it. You don't need the collective. You don't need all of us together to access that particular form of being, because the healing that we're doing to dissolve the contracts, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, no, hundreds of thousands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, around between 7 and 800,000 people receive this healing for the dissolving of contracts. Those people, we are all knitted together. And so we have access to this form of our own being that has the capacity to heal, to dissolve contracts, but also to heal, to bring the energy of that release when the contract is finished. There's a kind of it's like flexibility. It's like you become free. And there's that feeling of, oh, I'm free. I can really move now. I'm not restrained and constrained by the contracts. And that's exactly what you want in the knee, is that feeling of freedom. And that's the energy frequency that comes through the hand chakras and goes into the actual fleshy tissue of the knee. And it speaks to the cells, and it speaks to the little areas in between. And the causal body, which is also producing a light medicine or a light energy that rebuilds tissue, is also going in there. And what I'm seeing is that that energy frequency of the regrowth or the rebuilding of tissue is something that the ancestors need too. It seems that there are ancestors who need that. So as you give it to yourself, know that you're giving it to yourself all the way down to the molecular level, and you are also healing the ancestors. It's consciousness folding in on itself. That's what we're doing. We're finding lots of different ways to fold to loop the consciousness in on itself in order to produce the specific effect. Everybody is so dear to me. You're all so dear to me. I don't even have words. Thank you so much for tonight's healing session. I want you to know that this being doesn't tend to I don't tend to really sleep in the same way that people sleep. There's there's always awareness and alertness, and in the night the healings never stop. So it will be a pleasure to I feel as if the download that came to me earlier about everybody's specific unique situations was so precious. It's so intimate that was shared with me, and I feel like it's a huge honor. It will be an incredible joy for me to sit in the state of union with that particular aspect of healing capability, which we were revealed from tonight's session, and offer whatever can be offered in the way of healing for everybody. You guys are so exquisite. Oh, yeah. Thank you. So thank you everyone for being with me, and please forgive me. We went a little over time. We want everyone to have a nice night's sleep. Or night, whatever you do at night. And I will look forward to meeting with everybody again tomorrow morning. Most of you guys will be with me tomorrow morning too. So, and for some of you, it won't even be morning time. It'll be evening. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm going to close the meeting now. But thank you very much for being with me for this webinar. It's been wonderful. And thank you to everyone who sent in questions. Please feel free to send in more questions tomorrow. Because I'm really happy to answer all of them. It gives us a point of reference. Oh, one lady says, thank you so much. The one who had the eyes, she says she experienced beautiful light in her eyes and head during the healing for the eyes, and also softening in the area of the spine and the sciatica nerve. That's you healing yourself. But we're all kind of supporting because it's important. That's why. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good night. See you soon.